a card and playmat, and a whole bunch more, my friends. How are we doing this morning, gentlemen?
I'd say my energy reserves are stockpiled up for this top 8.
I see what you did there, Matthias. That's very well done. That's Matthias Hunt. He's a big fan of energy decks, and we hope you guys are too, because you're stuck with them today. Unless you're Patrick, we got little kids playing red.
I can't wait.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Rio and Austin, they're playing red decks, and Ryan, there's no Grixis here, anything like that. You gonna be okay?
There are only a small number of places I would rather be.
Okay, I can appreciate that. Yes, sir.
You can't say there's no Grixis when we have a copy of Nicol Bolas in the top 8.
That is true.
In the main deck.
That is true. Gerard Fabiano, your #1 overall seed, playing Nicol Bolas in his main deck. We're going to get to him actually right about now, so we're going to take a look at the left side of the bracket. Gerard Fabiano is your #1 overall seed. He is playing 4-color energy, but it is a rather unorthodox build. He's going to go in against Ely Cassis, who is playing Teamer energy. Pretty stock outside of that main deck copy of Spell Pierce that we're going to get to. But Gerard's kind of the star of the show here. He started off 12-0 this weekend. 12-0 is, he could have lost all 4 matches in Modern in the back half and still top 8'd. So he destroyed this weekend, and his 4-color energy build is very obscure. Patrick, we watched this a little bit, and it was very, very strange because we're talking about a deck that has Nicol Bolas, Nissa, Vital Force, and all these other obscure cards, and no Long Tusk Cub, no Glorybringer. What are we talking about here?
Well, when we get to the right side of the bracket, we're going to talk a little bit about Sam Black and playing 4-color energy as a way to try to get in the edge of the mirror match. Gerard has dialed that up past 10. I mean, this is a deck with no copies of Long Tusk Cub, no copies of Glorybringer, which is sometimes good in the mirror match, sometimes a little spotty against the instant speed removal, and he's loaded up on Planeswalkers and removal to try to get an edge against other energy decks.
Now, this Planeswalker removal plan, you see Fabiano on the left, Cassis on the right. Ideally, this is going to be good in the mirror match, Matthias. You've got Chandras, Nicol Bolas, Nissas, no Cubs that die to Harness, Lightning, and Abrades. You've got no Glorybringers, which, as Patrick mentioned, can be good in the mirror sometimes, can be poor. Some multiple copies of Confiscation Coup. It's a weird build of 4-color energy.
I mean, are we really that surprised that Gerard Fabiano cut the removal spells on the 2-drops to play about 6 more 5-drops? Like,
you make a good point.
That said, though, he's 8-0 with the deck. And I think, moreover, what I like is that this is, we've seen over the years, this is the style of deck that Gerard likes to play. Yep. And if the metagame, and it's going to be today, is mirrors of these mid-range 3- and 4-color decks crashing against each other, he's going to be at home in these sorts of games.
Well, this is what we talked about in the pregame show on Friday, Ryan, where we knew that on the standard portion of this tournament, Teamer Energy was probably going to be the most played deck. Story checked out. It was. 4-color energy, second most played deck. Various red decks, third most played deck. So you could make an argument with yourself coming into this tournament that, hey, I'm going to get really inbred here and build a deck that kind of smashes the other Teamer decks. Sam Black did that a little bit. Gerard did that a lot. And so, thus far, it's paying off, and it looks like it might pay off here against Ely.
Yeah, Gerard certainly turned it up to 11 in that regard. I do kind of like the Long Tusk Cubs. It's a scrappy little creature. It can take over a game, in particular if you don't assemble blockers. But these Planeswalkers are very high impact. Ely's really hoping to draw that one main deck Spell Pierce, probably in all the games. But the card that really stands out to me is actually the Scarab God.
Okay.
That card is, you can't deal with it. There's some Essence Scatters in Ely's sideboard, but he doesn't really have too much in the way of answers. I expect most of the games where Gerard just draws the Scarab God, he will end up winning.
Now, my question for you, Patrick, as I come back around the circle here, we've talked a lot about Gerard and his unorthodox build and how he's basically prepared for the mirror. How does Ely win? What can he do? I mean, he's on the draw first and foremost, and his deck outside of that Spell Pierce is pretty normalized.
Well, he has tools to be aggressive. Gerard's mana is a little bit spotty. And Gerard is playing, even though all the 6 and 7 mana cards in his deck are individually good in the matchup, you can draw too many of them.
Sure.
He is somewhat at the mercy of Gerard's draws. If Ely doesn't come out of the gates fast, the Scarab God, the main deck Vraskas, even the Nicol Bolas, all these are really problematic for Ely. The one Spell Pierce can do a lot of work, as Gerard is playing with a lot of expensive Planeswalkers, as we've mentioned, but the burden on him is to have a really aggressive start. I think he has to be willing to mulligan hands that don't start, something that opens up on a turn 4 Bristling Hydra, let's say. That's probably not good enough, even if the hand would normally be a keep.
Sure.
But, it's how fast can he come out of the gates? Can he put Gerard on the back foot? And then hopefully a couple of his counter spells can show up at key times.
Matthias, you see any way that Ely can poke holes in this matchup?
Gerard's deck has so many high cards on the curve that I think Ely's consistency can definitely poke a hole in this. We look at Gerard's removal, because he doesn't have these 2-drops. He's got 1 Supreme Will, 2 Essence Scatter, things like that. Ely, just with a consistent start and a tune into a Long Tusk Cub, really puts pressure on Gerard to have some pretty specific answers at pretty specific times. I think Ely can win that one.
Ryan, for you, it's going to be tough, I think, but the Essence Scatters are nice, the Supreme Will is okay, and if Gerard's able to get into that mid to late game, probably going to win pretty easily. So Ely, maybe even, has the mulligan pretty aggressively here, first 2s and 3s to get the game started?
Yeah, I think that's very much true. It's very important for Ely to get out ahead. We've covered a good amount of Team Ramirez this weekend, and the story is usually what's on top of the player's deck. You make a play based on setting up the battlefield for this turn, going into the next turn. What's the battlefield going to look like then? The higher volume of high-impact cards that your deck contains usually gives you some kind of advantage in a game that kind of follows that texture. So Ely really wants to get out in front. He's going to be on the draw. Gerard is, of course, the 1 seed. That does make you more capable of mulliganing a little more aggressively. You get that scry before you have to come online. He's really going to want a Servant or a Cub on turn 2 and hope to follow up from there.
Yeah, I think he's got to be quick out of the gate to be able to try to steal this one, especially because he is on the draw. Essence Scatter, obviously a card, and along with Supreme Will, much better on the play than the draw, so that also gives Gerard a slight advantage in this matchup. And as we go to our pick'ems here, this isn't going to surprise too many people at home, I think. I'm going with Gerard. I just think that the way that his deck is built, obviously it's obscure and it's different, but he came here, it appears, with one goal in mind, and thus far it's working. He's 8-0 in Standard. He wants to beat up on the mirrors. I don't know how great his matchup is against Red, but he's not against Red right now. He will be in the next round, as we'll get to that in just a moment. But give me Gerard in this matchup. Patrick, to you.
I'm taking Gerard as well. I think were Ely on the play, maybe it would be a little bit different, but I think with Gerard having that advantage, on top of the fact that I think his deck is very well suited for this kind of matchup, gives Gerard a pretty substantial edge.
Matthias, over to you.
Yeah, this is the kind of archetype that Gerard just really knows about. And he's built his deck in a way where, yeah, we haven't seen exactly how it plays out on camera, but you look at the results, he's 8-0. This is what he wants to be doing. I'm going to pick Gerard too.
Ryan, I'm coming to you. Is it a clean sweep?
No.
No.
I like an underdog, I'm going to pick Ely here. He's a player that consistently surprises me, and there's also just the case, when you have a deck that's clearly the best deck, and I think we can all agree that Team Energy is going to be that deck for Standard, there's a reason that the stock list is the stock list. You can make your innovations to try to win the mirror, but at the end of the day, there's a reason that the leaner, more efficient shell is the deck that people go to. Gerard's going to have some hands that just don't function because his mana curve is too high, and I think that Ely is really going to be able to take advantage of those draws.
Nick Miller, I think, is on the side of Gerard. He is, so it's 4-1, an underdog's tale over here for Ryan Overturf. We'll see if he can get that right, as he's not going to allow the broom to be out here. Now we go from 2 veterans in Gerard Fabiano and Ely Casillas to the 2 youngest people to ever make an invitational top 8 here. And Rio Trevathan playing Treasure Red and Austin Collins playing Ramunap Red. Rio, 13. Austin, 15. I love it. I love it. Little kids playing Red. Yes! Look, that picture tells the whole story. That is amazing. They're so young. They're in the invitational top 8. And heck, one of these 2 players could win it because, look, Red is going to come through. It's either going to play against Gerard or Ely. Now, on one side, you've got Treasure Red, a deck that Ben Stark put on the map at Grand Prix Atlanta. And then Ramunap Red, of course, we all know this deck is basically, at this point, a stock, arguably the second best deck in the format behind Teamer Energy. Patrick, I'm going to come to you since you are the Red guy. You are the Red guy.
Look at that graphic. Hell yeah. I'm looking forward to that.
Little
match.
kids with beanies slinging mountains. I love it.
So I think this is really going to come down to Austin Collins and his 4 midnight copies of Hazoret.
Sure.
I think in the absence of that card, if you just remove those copies from his deck, he is way behind in this matchup. Rio has so much more removal, so much more card advantage, 4 main deck copies of Glorybringer. He's really well situated, but he doesn't answer that card cleanly.
Sure. So
I think the pre-board games are just going to come down to, does Austin Collins find Hazoret on curve? If so, I think he has a good edge, and if not, I think he's way behind.
I'm going to go over to you, Matthias. This Treasure Red deck, it's an obscure one on paper. Ben Stark getting second place in the Grand Prix. He had 1 Hazoret in his deck at the Grand Prix. He said he would cut it. When you think of red decks in the Standard format, you think of Hazoret being the best card and the main reason to play Red. I believe there are no copies in Rio's deck. What's going on here?
Right, so you start with that Grand Prix Atlanta deck list from Ben Stark, and that's definitely what Rio's looking at here. He has cut the Hazard from the main. He still has 2 left in the sideboard. But the part that I'm actually kind of concerned about is that he's gone in another direction with it, which the Sand Stranglers that Ben Stark had used in that Grand Prix run, he's cut those from the deck as well, and he's replacing them with cards like these Rampaging Ferocidons and additional copies of Treasure Map, additional Chandra. And I'm just not sure how much that plays in a red mirror here. A Sand Strangler, that's really the card I'd actually be wanting against this low-end deck. So, yeah, it's an interesting archetype. I don't know if I like it as much right now.
Ryan, I'm coming to you. We're talking Treasure Red, we're talking Raminap Red. One very stock, the other anything but. One, I just keep thinking to myself, one has Hazoret, one doesn't. So I'm kind of with Patrick here, where if Austin's able to draw his Hazarets, it's gonna be hard for Rio to win.
Well, Hazoret is certainly the best card in Austin's deck, but it's also the case that one deck has Glorybringer and one deck doesn't.
True.
Rio's brought 4 of those to the table. The thing about that is that it costs 5. You're playing a very fast deck on the other side of the table. Sometimes you just die with Glorybringer or multiple Glorybringers in your hand. If you're able to cast them in this mirror, though, that's a shade better than the Desert Strangler.
Sand Strangler.
Sand Strangler, yeah. Let's just Flame Tongue Kava that actually he just hits you right away. If you can assemble multiple Glorybringers, you just get out ahead. Sometimes the ground creatures look gummed up. All the ground creatures just get hit by some 2 or 3 damage removal spell. The Glorybringers are certainly very impactful if we get to the stage where you can cast them. So I think that's something to watch there. But again, yeah, Austin coming out fast with Hazoret, that's going to be near impossible to beat.
So Patrick, in Magic's past, you have seen in red mirrors, generally the person who goes bigger in a red mirror wins. Not always the case, but a lot of the time, I think of cards like Wrathy Dragon, Fledgling Dragon, Glorybringer in this case is your big dragon. You're always trying to go over the top. That's basically Rio's plan here, right? It's just I'm trying to go over the top. Yeah, I can't kill Hazoret. Maybe I can block it long enough or my life total's high enough and I can fly over Glorybringers, draw some cards with Treasure Maps, and be able to win that way. I think that's kind of the plan here.
Well, typically it's a function of how good the burn spells are.
Okay.
When the burn spells are really powerful, let's say in Modern, you can't go big because the game ends so quickly and in such a non-interactive fashion that deciding into some 4-mana 5/5 flyer, like who cares? So you're just getting Lava Spiked out of the game. In Standard right now, the power level is contained mostly in the creatures, and those are the kind of matchups typically, historically, where it's been good to go big. Rio is the much bigger deck game 1, which is why, absent of Hazoret, I like his matchup a lot. 4-mana copies of Glorybringer on top of 3 Treasure Maps, which can leverage a lot of card advantage, his 3 Chandras, more spot removal. The skeleton of this is theoretically set up for a red mirror. It's just that Hazoret is this big question mark. Can he answer it? Can he leverage his extra cards? Because there's going to be times where he draws a bunch of extra cards. He has removal spells in his hand. He's somewhat ahead on the battlefield, and Hazoret will just invalidate all that stuff. There's some times where he'll have enough extra resources to work with that he might be able to work around a Hazoret. But if Austin doesn't find it, he's not as well set up for a historical red game as Rio is.
Matthias, dare I say that this comes down solely to Hazoret? Is that just flat it at this point?
Not solely to Hazoret. I do like what Patrick's saying about how in red mirrors you want to go a bit bigger, and on paper Rio is taking the right approach. I think my concern is when you look at red mirrors where players go big out of the sideboard, sometimes this comes down also to blocking. The things that where one of the ways to beat a deck full of 1-drops is to play just some 2-drops that profitably block 1-drops. And just the creature suite in mono red doesn't always line up that way right now. You're looking at cards like On-Crop Crasher, or even Earthshaker Kenra, because on its first attack, yeah, it's the smallest creature in 2-1, but it gets the no block clause. Rio's plan of just going slightly bigger, he still takes damage while doing this, so I still think there's incremental damage he could lose that way. And yeah, on top of that, Hazoret's a huge concern.
Yeah, Hazoret's probably the biggest issue, Ryan. I don't know if there's a way to overcome this. I will say this. Rio, I want to make sure I get this right. Rio's on the play. He's the 4 seed, Austin's the 5. Does that make a huge difference for you? It feels like these games might go kind of long, though.
I mean, when the plan is to actually go big in a red mirror, being on the draw is not that bad. You take 1 hit, maybe 2 extra hits, but you have more time to draw your shocks, your lightning strikes, manage the board. It's certainly a problem in the face of Hazoret. You have to get online ahead of that. One thing that I do like about Austin's position, if you just look at hands, you say, this deck's good with lands and spells. that's more true of Austin's decks than Rio's deck.
Sure.
If I present you a hand that's like Mountain, Dunes of the Dead, and some mix of Treasure Map and Glorybringer, that's a pretty non-functional hand, particularly in this matchup. You're going to get run over before you ever come online in any kind of meaningful way. So that's another spot where I do like Austin's deck a good degree more.
Well, we take a look at our pick'ems here. I'm going to go with Austin's deck, and it's pretty simple for me. I've cast Hazoret before. It makes winning games pretty easy, and he has 4 of them. So if he draws them a bunch, I think it's going to be difficult for Rio to win. So give me Austin Collins.
I like Rio here. I know that Hazoret's a huge concern. I think without that card showing up, Rio's got a big edge. He has, it's funny, it's emblematic of the matchup. I think he has 13 good cards in his sideboard for this matchup.
Okay.
None of which answer Hazoret, but are really good against everything else.
Yep.
And I think, having Hazoret on schedule 3 games out of 5, and probably needing to do some other stuff, because I think if it's just Hazoret and not a whole lot else going on, Rio can mitigate that card to some extent. It's a risky pick, but I'm going to go with Rio.
Matthias, to you.
Yeah, I think on paper, Rio has the right archetype for this matchup, but that's just not where the whole thing takes place. I think between Treasure Red and Ramonep Red is, at the end of the day, just a better deck. And it's enough better of a deck that even when it's down in the matchup, I still like it. I'm going to pick Austin.
Ryan, you want some Treasure Maps? You want some Hazorets?
Pretty into Hazoret. In my experience in red mirrors, just less has to go right. They have a functional, even very powerful Hazoret draw than it does to have a Glorybringer draw. In a deck with no card selection, outside of Treasure Map, which is pretty slow in the matchup, you can't really cast Treasure Map in a removal spell until at a position where you're probably taking a good amount of damage on the battlefield. Just getting to 5 lands and casting 5 drops, especially when you have 4 copies of them, you get more draws that are kind of non-functional, and I like Hazoret for that reason.
Well, let's see who Nick Miller likes here as we close it out. He's going to go with Austin Collins as well. So, Patrick, you're the only one going bigger here. You got the young gun.
Like I said, this pick could look really bad if Austin just has Hazoret on schedule 3 out of 4 games or something like that.
Yep.
But I think Rio, once you get past the card with the top billing, is really well set up for this kind of matchup.
Well, that is our left side of the bracket here, folks, and we're going to take a short break here from Roanoke, Virginia. When we do come back, we're going to analyze the other 2 matchups. It's Benjamin Nikolic versus Danny Jessup, and then Michael Hamilton versus Sam Black. So we'll see you guys back here for those 2 matchups just a bit. All right, everybody, we are back for our pregame show here of the top 8 of the Season 2 Invitational Weekend. Center Phillips, Patrick Sullivan, Matthias Hunt, Ryan Overturf, Nick Miller getting us ready here for the top 8 as well. So we've gone over the left side of the bracket. Now we're going to get our eyes on the right side, where you're going to see some names you are familiar with here on the SCG Tour. Benjamin Nikolic, Danny Jessup, we hope you like energy mirrors, because they're going to be in one, and we're going to be watching quite a few of them here this Sunday morning / afternoon. For Nikolic, Ryan, pretty good pick to win the tournament, my friend.
I like his chances.
Yeah, you called this one during the pregame show. I'm a little bit impressed here. You know, you've got him into the top 8. You got Danny Jessup, the best deck kind of guy. I talked to Danny earlier this weekend. Just like, so Team Energy and Grixis Death Shadow, right? He's like, yeah, duh. Just plays. You could actually just, if you sit against Danny in a tournament, you know what you're playing against. Always. He always just plays the best 2 decks, or whatever the best deck is in the format. He's done it again. It's got him another invitational top 8, so congrats to him. For Nikolic, Team Energy, yes, his Jeskai control deck will secure the ways Torrential Gearhulk, and a very controlling deck is what he's gotten the job done in Modern. But we're not playing Modern, we're playing Standard, Patrick. We are in a Teamer Mirror. I guess first to the board with Long Tusk Cub?
Well, so in terms of trying to select a deck that's favored here, 75 cards to 75 cards, kind of shrugged my shoulders at it. The Teamer Mirror matches are very much, there's a bunch of 3, 4, 5 mana plays, responses to those plays, and if your answers line up the wrong way, you die.
Sure.
how these games typically go. Nikolic probably a small edge, I think, in deck construction and being on the play, but the games are very complicated. So both these players are going to have a lot of opportunity to leverage their play skill.
Matthias, I'm coming over to you. I don't know if you've played a lot of Team Energy mirrors. I've played a few for Grand Prix Atlanta and playing online. It is kind of swingy and back and forth.
I mean, yeah, this is a mid-range mirror, so a lot of times it's not about actually the like ins and outs of the technical play on the board, but it's going to be about, you know, playing against the top card of their deck, against what could possibly be in their hand. I do think that the decisions aren't always straightforward in this matchup. There is going to be a lot of play, and it's going to come down to things like practice and preparation for the players.
Well, we've seen that, right? I mean, it's no accident that Brad Nelson and Corey Baumeister, Ryan, they keep destroying standard Grand Prix with this deck. You know, they do make their tweaks with multiple copies of Confiscation Coup main deck one weekend, less Glory Bringers the next, tons of Bristling Hydras where some people don't agree. I think that's a pretty swingy card in the mirror. You know, what are you looking at for this particular matchup between Jessup and your pick, Benjamin Nikolic?
Jessup does have 4 Bristling Hydras. There's a little bit of diminishing returns on casting multiple Bristling Hydras. You know, the insulated against removal or whatever. It's a significant energy cost to make one of them large. You can't generally afford to make 2 of them particularly large. What I do like is that Nikolic has 4 Glory Bringer to Jessup's 2.
Sure.
That card just goes over the air. One thing about Bristling Hydra plan is the ground gets kind of gummed up. You can always afford to chump block with your Servant of the Conduit. It doesn't do too much work as you go into the later game. Obviously, you can't harness lightning it, but just generally, if you get an uncontested Glory Bringer, I think it just does so much work. Consistently impressed with that one as a top deck in the matchup, and I just like Nikolic's list for that reason.
How much do we like Glory Bringer in the mirror, though? You have 4 versus 2, as you mentioned, numbers-wise, Ryan. But, you know, we also look at these decks have access to Chandra's Defeat in the sideboard, and you have to imagine that's going to be coming in after sideboard here. You know, what do we think about Glory Bringer post-sideboard? Still a good card to you?
I mean, it depends. Again, players will have access to each other's deck list. It depends on how many copies of Chandra's Defeat, typically, and Essence Scatter to a lesser degree. I still think it's above replacement level, certainly, and in game 1, it's one of the better cards.
Matthias, I know you have the deck list in front of you. Does anything stand out to you in the sideboard to me that is going to give one player the edge over the other?
Well, they have largely the same cards in the sideboards. Dan Jessup has a Lifecrafter's Bestiaire, which Nikolic doesn't have. I don't see that really being a turning point. I'm going to your question about Glory Bringers. I do see that the card can. There are some awkwardness in the matchup. You know, it doesn't kill other Glory Bringers. It's not going to kill a Bristling Hydra. It could get Chandra's defeated. It's pretty good against Planeswalkers still, though. It's a 5-drop, and we're playing a mid-range mirror, so it's probably still fine.
Probably still kind of the best thing going on. I don't know if that tilts it one way or the other. You know, the 4 versus 2, the number of Bristling Hydras, things like that. I have seen in matchups like this where, you know, someone gets off to a good Cub start. You know, that can win the game by itself. You know, Fabiano has no Cubs this weekend because he's trying to beat the mirror. But we have seen where Cub and a Rogue Refiner, you know, if they don't have a removal spell, or, you know, the player on the draw plays a Rogue Refiner, that gets killed by an Abraider or Harness Lightning, they might not be able to catch up. Maybe that's the recipe for success here?
It certainly is one of the ways you win games in the mirror. There's going to be different textures, obviously. You have the game where one player runs away with a Long Tusk Cub. Turn 1 Attune certainly facilitates that. You have the game where Warlord Virtuoso actually dominates because they're able to make 4 or 5 Thopters uncontested. And then you have games where it's all about drawing more 4s and 5s at the top of your deck. And in between those, there's the Rogue Refiner games. It's kind of all over the place. A lot of what matters is kind of the intangibles. What you don't see when you're watching the match is understanding of how to evaluate opening hands, having a good theoretical approach to sideboarding, having a good plan before the game actually starts. And I think mental preparation actually matters a lot more than many of the in-game decisions.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, too, about this particular matchup. If you talk to various players, and we saw this kind of, I use the word argument, even though I wouldn't consider it an argument, but let's go with discussion then. Better word. Brad Nelson feels very strongly about Bristling Hydra, where other people are like, Bristling Hydra is not very good in the mirror. I kind of default to Brad because I think he's the best standard player in the world. So some people believe it's great, some people don't. You know, you see 4 Glory Bringers versus 2 just across these 2 deck lists. Obviously, one player feels like Glory Bringer's awesome, where the other person feels like it's just okay. The sideboards vary a little bit. And then, you know, I know that you read the article by Sam Black this week where he's boarding out Cubs on the draw because he feels like it's just too slow to get to the battlefield. So those kind of decisions, I think when we watch this match, if we have time to jump to it, we're going to see a lot of re-sideboarding depending on who's on the play and who's on the draw for the games. So that'll be interesting to see exactly how players, what they're going to present every game, assuming this does go 5 games, which we will find out soon enough. For me, I'm going to go with Danny Jessup. The more experienced of the two, the more successful of the two. Danny's been here before. It's not his first invitational top 8. It certainly won't be his last. And look, he just plays the best deck in every format, so I imagine he's probably played this deck more than Ben. And his brother Andrew said just play it, and he did, and he's in top 8. So give me Danny J.
I think I took Benjamin.
Doesn't remember. You took Benjamin.
I'm pretty sure. I don't know. He's on the.
He's right there. You
Nailed
took him.
it.
Great. Still got it. He's on the play. Slight edge in deck construction. Meh. I don't know. I like him here.
Sure.
A ringing endorsement.
Yeah.
So this one, with Ben Nikolic, we're seeing someone who is really a rising star here, I think, in Season 2 on the SCG Tour. And when you see players really making that jump into the competitive scene, that first bit, like, there's a hunger going on. And for this is the best finish I think we've had for Nikolic so far.
Yep.
I think when you have someone who's practicing that hard and they get their first big shot, they are that much more in tune with the game and they want it that much more. And from what I've seen of Nikolic so far this season, I've been really impressed. I think he's going to move to the semis.
All right, I'm coming to you.
The term in the stand-up community where you call somebody a comedian's comedian because all the funny people know them, but the audience has no idea who they are.
Sure.
And Benjamin Nikolic is very much a Magic player's Magic player.
Okay.
Every good player on the tour knows who Nikolic is. And he has enough finishes where some people at home do. And when you're at that level, you just want everybody to finally realize how good you are. I'm going to echo Matthias' sentiment. I think he's very hungry. I think he wants this win a lot. I think he's going to play very technically well. He probably played a ton of Teamer mirrors. I'm going to pick Nikolic.
Okay, Nick Miller. Is Nick Miller with me on Danny J? I'm going solo. Well, there you go. We've had some interesting picks so far. We've had some 4-1s. I think, unfortunately,
I'm not going out on a limb at all. I'm part of the 4 every time.
Unfortunately for Michael Hamilton, I don't think he's going to like where this goes for him, because this is our last match, so we take a look at the bracket one more time. Michael Hamilton, he's an open winner. He got the job done with his weird, crazy control deck.
Dovenbahn, 2 of them.
Yeah, Dovenbahn in his control deck. I think he had a Nicol Bolas too.
Oh, yeah.
If memory serves, yeah, way back during the release of Hour of Devastation. He got the title there. Matthias and Ryan covered that open. Sam Black, well, his resume kind of speaks for itself. Multiple-time Pro Tour top 8 competitor, probably on his way to the Magic Hall of Fame, and one heck of a deck builder. He came here 4-color energy. Same deck he played at Pro Tour Ixalan, he said. Didn't change very much of anything against Teamer energy. Look, we kind of know how this goes at this point, or at least we think we do. If you played 4-color, it was with the goal of beating Teamer. You have access to Vraska, you have access to the Scarab God. If those cards come down on the board uncontested, the chances of you winning the game are very high. We saw Sam do that earlier this weekend, Patrick. That's his goal again. There's not really much else to say, right?
Now, Sam did not have a great performance in Standard in this tournament. That is worth mentioning. I believe he ran the table in Modern and had a 4-4 finish in Standard, if memory serves. So not really a dominating performance from Sam, especially given how prevalent Teamer and 4-color energy was and how prepared Sam is for the mirror match. You would expect a better performance. But I think the top 8 should be very solid for him, just looking at the right-hand side of the bracket. And I think a mixture of Sam 75 plus just his expertise and experience in this kind of matchup, I think he's a solid pick here.
It's tough just to pick matchup-wise. It's tough for me to pick Teamer energy over 4-color energy. The reason you're playing 4-color is to beat Teamer, right, Matthias? That's the whole point of this selection.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the point. Now, these decks are pretty similar, so even then, you know, you're picking an extra 5% in the matchup. But when you have a situation where Sam Black's going to get the extra 5% and he's the player he is going into the match, that's just going to compound.
Yeah, I mean, of the two, no disrespect to Michael Hamilton, Sam has the deeper resume, Ryan. We know that he's probably the better player technically. It doesn't mean Michael can't win, but Michael does have some things going in his favor. As an example, he's the number 2 overall seed. Being on the play in this matchup does matter.
Yeah, it's certainly something you can leverage, in particular when you play those long Tusk Cub games, those Rogue Refiner games. Getting out ahead, it can convert to some percentage points. A lot of people say, in particular, when you have more similar lists, being on the play is just generally going to be an advantage with cards this powerful. Sam's list is a little bit different, so that's going to give Sam some edge. But yeah, play certainly goes to Hamilton anyway.
Patrick, when you take a look at this 4-color list as opposed to Gerard's 4-color list, Gerard's is kind of off the reservation with all these Planeswalkers, no Cubs, no Glorybringers. Sam's is much more normalized. Is there one that you like more than the other? Because there's a real chance that these players, Gerard and Sam, actually play against each other in the finals.
Well, I think the test is going to be, can Gerard get out of assuming that Gerard wins his quarterfinal matchup, can he get out of the red deck?
Sure.
I think Sam here is at least acknowledging game 1 that there are other decks in the format, and
true.
Gerard kind of isn't.
Yep.
I think that if you ended up with Gerard and Sam in the finals, I think Gerard would be a pretty substantial favorite. But the test is going to be, does Gerard get out of his quarterfinal matchup where he's playing against kind of a regular build that's a little bit on the faster side, a little bit leaner, and then the real test, assuming he gets past the quarterfinal, is going to be, can he beat a red deck in a 5-game set?
Matthias, with those 4-color builds with the Vraskas and the well, for Gerard, he's got the Nicol Bolas and the Scarab God, of course. You know, you're making a real statement that you're trying to beat a very specific deck. Gerard much more so than Sam, but either one of those decks, do you like either one more than the other?
Well, I mean, I think I like Sam Black's deck in general more because it really is just Teamer with a few extra big cards. And you see, you know, you still have the full set of Long Tusk Cubs. You look at black cards in the main, and Sam has 4. 2 Scarab Gods, 2 Vraskas, otherwise he is a Teamer deck. I mean, Gerard's deck, on the other hand, that is going to be a mid-range deck. So I think in a general tournament, I like Sam's deck. I mean, in a top 8 of 6 energy decks, I think Gerard might have found something.
Now, Ryan, I would come to you, and I would ask you, how could Michael Hamilton win? But we have a broom here. I'm pretty sure we have a broom in favor of Sam.
I picked Sam.
Yeah, I picked Sam. Patrick, you picked Sam, right? Matthias, you picked Sam. There's the broom. I just don't know how Michael wins, honestly. I mean, he is on the play, so he could steal some games, but I don't really see it.
Well, I mean, he certainly can win. This is a mirror match that, you know, Michael is on the play. His deck has some powerful curve outs. The bar's not. It's not impossible for him to win, but he's just an underdog going into it.
Yeah, and I think that Sam probably knows this matchup well enough that even though Michael Hamilton is on the play, he can get in the Tune plus Cub plus Rogue Refiner, Whirl of Virtuoso start. It just still seems very, very difficult. So all 5 of us, that's Nick Miller included, do go with Sam Black. But now it is time for us to choose our overall winners. Hey, Sam Black, I'm sticking with you. I think Sam gets by Michael. And then he's going to run himself into another Teamer Energy mirror, either Ben or Danny. And if I'm going to pick him to beat Michael, I'm going to pick him to beat Ben or Danny. And then I don't know. I don't think Gerard's getting through the red decks. I just don't see it where I think that Sam can in a best out of 5. So I do think that he's going to play against Austin Collins in the finals. But I think that Sam's going to win. Over to you.
I'm picking Sam for largely the same reason. I think that if you flipped Gerard and Sam's spot in the bracket, that I would like Gerard to win the event. But the right-hand side of the bracket, I think, is so favorable for Sam. And if you think that someone is a pretty heavy favorite to get to the finals, that makes them a pretty heavy favorite to win the whole thing compared to the other 7 competitors. Combine that with Sam's resume as a competitive Magic player, I think he's critical of his technical play, but still I think the tightest technical player of the 8 in the top 8, and I'm going to go with Sam.
Matthias, I'm coming to you.
Yeah, so I know, you know, Sam Black is probably the strongest technical player. I'm going to agree with Patrick here. His deck does have an advantage. It's not the overwhelming advantage I would have thought. And at the same time, I don't want to ignore the fact that he's 4-4 in standard here. And I think because of that, I'm just, you know, sure, he's got 2 matches against Teamer to make it into the finals, but I could definitely see him losing one of them. The player I like is Gerard Fabiano. He's built the deck for the tournament. He's got the 1 seed. He's on the play each time. Yes, he's going to have to beat a red deck in the semifinals, but if he couldn't beat a red deck, then I don't know if he would have gone 8-0. I like Gerard to win the event.
Ryan, I'm coming to you. Final one.
I want to pick Benjamin Nikolic.
You can't come off it now.
Well, yeah, you built it up so much.
Yeah.
One thing that really matters when you're playing at the top levels, in particular after you've kind of reached that first big ladder, you hit the top 8 of the tournament, emotional investment is something that's just paramount to Magic success. I just don't think Sam Black has that for standard this weekend. He went 4-4. When you talked about him during the tournament, you'd say, Sam, how your rounds going? He'd say, I can't wait to play Modern again. When I talked to him about his odds in the top 8, he said it's a bunch of Teamer mirrors. Didn't offer any insights beyond that.
Sure.
And I echo that sentiment again. I think that Nikolic is very hungry. I think he's very invested, and I think that matters a lot.
Well, Nick Miller, who's your pick? Your pick is Sam. So 3 for Sam, 1 for Gerard, and 1 for Benjamin Nikolic. And it would be fun if Ryan got it correct from beginning to end. With that, everybody, we're going to prepare for our first match. We're going to watch Sam Black playing against Michael Hamilton. The backup match will be Danny Jessup against Benjamin Nikolic. Patrick and I will be taking care of those. Matthias Hunt and Ryan Overturf will be taking care of the little kids playing red. People wondering at home if we're going to have them on camera. Yeah, we're going to watch Austin Collins and Rio Trevathan burn each other apart. And if we have time to jump over to Gerard Fabiano against Eli Cassis, which I think we will, we'll watch that in the backup match as quarterfinal number 2. But for Ryan and Patrick, and Matthias and Nick Miller. Cedric Phillips here. We'll be back for our first match here from Roanoke just a bit.